In death, the fur-clad warriors of the Kosargi serve Radukar the Wolf as fiercely as they did in life. They are his Gallowers, executioners, and enforcers, cadaverous brutes whose hunger for flesh has not abated in death. The thunderous thump of their boots causes the populace of Ulfricon to scatter like cockroaches, for wherever the Kosargi Nightguard roam, slaughter is soon to follow. Hello, adventurer, and welcome to the Cursed City. Cursed City is back, baby! Hello fellow Heroes of the Blue, and welcome to my channel, and also welcome to another episode of Heavy Contrast. Heavy Contrast is a series where I try to paint one miniature to the highest standard possible using just contrast paints and highlights. And for this episode, I'm going to paint one of the coolest minis on the set. I know I probably said this for each and every mini of the set, but this is the Kosargi Nightguard. So, let's get cracking. As you can see, we're starting from a base coat of Mechanical Standard Grey all over and Grey Sear from above, and my first step will be to darken down his coat and his trousers using a mix of 2 parts Black Templar and 1 part Contrast. I'm also going to apply this over his boots and anything that will be black leather, so basically all over him except for the fur, face, flesh, etc. The idea here is to darken this way down because all of his colors are very muted and very dark, so starting from this base coat makes sense. And as you can see, sometimes primer can get a bit hydrophobic, but if you insist, everything will be alright and it will end up catching. I'm going to try to avoid the things that won't be this color, just because cleaning up a zenithal prime is very difficult. And as always, going back and absorbing the excess is also a good idea. So with that dry, it's time to apply the color over the coat. And for this I'm going to use a mix of 2 parts Gryphhound Orange, 2 parts Blood Angels Red and 1 part Black Templar. Again, I'm going to try and preserve the color of all the parts that won't be this color, like the belts for example, so I'm going to go carefully around them. With that done and dry, I'm going to apply Crit Camo over his pants. And finally, I'm going to apply a layer of a mix of 1 part Wildwood and 1 part Black Templar over all of the other bits, all of the black leather basically. With all the contrast layers now fully dry, I'm going to start highlighting, and I'm going to start with the coat because, well, it's the most fun. So for that I'm going to use Warbeater's Red. And Warbeater's Red is not only the perfect color for the first highlight, but also a very nice color to hide imperfection, especially in the highlight areas. This is very similar to the color that is already here, just slightly bit lighter. So I'm going to glaze this. I have this set to a sort of a heavy glaze consistency, and I'm going to glaze it towards the top of the coat here. On top of all those glazed highlights, I'm going to also do a chunky edge highlight of this towards the lower edges. Also the folds up to the very bottom here. With the Warbearer's red highlight done, this is looking a lot better. We have a more defined area of highlight. I'm going to move into the next one. This is a squeak orange. And the main highlight here will be an edge highlight, very thin edge highlight, especially here at the bottom. But I'm also going to thin this down and do a small glazing on the top. This is the glazing consistency I have. You can see there, it's pretty much not there. But squeak orange is a very opaque color, so we need to be careful here. Otherwise we will leave tile marks. If that happens, just glaze it down with Warbearer's red on the opposite direction. Also, on top of this, and with the same basic consistency, maybe a little bit extra like this, I'm going to do some scratches and some marks here. This can also be used to help blending the previous glazing. With that highlight done, I'm going to move into the next one. This is Cadian Fleshtone. And I'm using a Fleshtone here because this will turn it into a very washed out, like old cloth look, which is perfect for these guys because, well, they are dead basically. And I'm just going to do a thin edge highlight here at the bottom, just smaller than the squeak orange one. And I'm also going to highlight some of the spots where the scratches get into the edge highlight. And I'm going to continue to do this volumetric highlight again, thinning it down to this sort of consistency as we have been doing before, and just applying this very carefully. Just a small volumetric highlight there, not too much. Don't want to make this too washed out or too fleshy looking, but just a little bit of volumetric highlight will help us here. And if some of the blends are not very good, you can always hide all your crimes with a little bit of scratches. And with that highlight done, you can stop here and it will be pretty much perfect. But I'm going to do one last highlight. I'm going to take Kislev Flesh. I'm going to push the contrast on the upper sides just a tiny bit, just some dots of this. Just on the very brightest parts. And with that done, it's now time to move into the dark brown leather. And for the first highlight, I'm going to use a Stormbearing fur. And I'm just going to do an edge highlight with this. And of course, don't be afraid of doing some weathering here as we did with the coat. And with that highlight done, I'm going to move into the next one. This will be Administratum Grey. And I'm shifting away from a warm grey into a neutral grey, so it again, it looks more faded. And I'm just going to do the very thin edge highlight here. Mainly trying to keep my Administratum Grey line totally inside of the Escaping Blight danger line. But again, I'm also going to use some dots to break up the edge highlight. I haven't finished all my edge highlights with Administratum Grey, but just for the sake of speed, I'm going to move into the final highlight, and then I want to finish everything off. And for the last highlight, I'm going to complete the shift from warm to cold with a final highlight of Blue Horror. I'm going to be very sparse with this, but just a teeny tiny amount here is going to complete that, again, tonal shift. Making the highlights cold means that the model will look more dead, more lifeless, and more faded. With all that painted, now it's time to paint his pants, and for this I'm going to start with a mix of 2 parts Vulcan green and 1 part Elysian green. The idea here is to do a chunky edge highlight with this, but you can also glaze some of it towards the upper surfaces. Again, as always, this sort of consistency here. With that highlight on, I'm going to move into a Strachan green, and this will be essentially just a very thin edge highlight here. And for the final highlight on the green cloth, I'm going to use Nurgle green. And with this green, I'm just going to do very small dots, basically. With all that done, it's now time to base coat other areas so we can paint them. And I'm going to start with the skin. For that, I'm going to start with a coat of 1 part Gilliman Flesh and 1 part Contrast Medium. I'm basically just going to tint this with a little bit of flesh tone before we apply our next layer, just to give it a hint that it was once alive. As before, I'm going to try and be careful not to mess up any other thing that I have already painted or that I have already base coated with nice Zenithal Prime, but it's always possible to fix it, so I'm not too concerned. The layer of Gilliman Flesh is now dry, and I'm going to apply over this another one, and this is Militarum Green mixed with Contrast Medium, again 1:1. I cleaned up all the areas that I was messy with, especially teeth, nails, stuff like that. And now I'm going to apply a mix of Skeleton Horde and Contrast Medium. This is 1 part Skeleton Horde and 1 part Contrast Medium. And I will apply this over the beard, over the fur as well. While the Skeleton Horde dries, I'm going to paint the wood, and for this I'm going to use a 1:1 mix of Nazgret Yellow and Agaros Dunes. Our Skeleton Horde is dry, and now I can apply more hues into the beard. This will be Grief Charger Grey. And layering these 2 colors for me creates a super interesting final result with warm and cold elements all at the same time. With that layer applied, I'm going to add more shading into the wood, and for this I'm going to use a mix of 1 part Wildwood and 4 parts Contrast Medium. I'm going to apply this to the extremes of the wood And I'm going to feather it out into the rest, just like that. I will apply more layers of this, as many as I need to get to the result that I feel happy with. I'm also going to apply this to the tops of the fur here. And to the whole of the fur on his helmet. Again, as with the wood, I will apply more layers until I'm happy with the result. All the layers of wildwood are now applied, and you can see I went very heavy on the top section of the fur and on the shaft of the axe. And while that dries, I'm going to start highlighting the skin, and for this I'm going to use Nurglen green. Now I will apply Nurglen green especially towards the dark areas, like here under his hand. Because you will see that at a certain point, for example here, Nurglen green is not doing a lot, so I'm going to stop right there. For the second highlight on the skin, I'm going to move into Ironrack skin. Ironrack is a lovely hue for him. And I'm just going to apply a general highlight with this. And for the final highlight on the skin, I'm going to use Pallid Witch Flesh. Here it's just a matter of picking up the most prominent features here. There are certain areas that I will cover with pink now, and I will over highlight those, so the tendons, for example, so they show better underneath the pink. Also, I will do that with the gums, for example. With the skin now highlighted, I'm going to apply those patches of color. For this I'm going to use a glaze of Volupus Pink. This is the sort of consistency I'm going for. I'm using contrast medium here, and I'm just going to apply several layers of this. Not only on the holes here at the hand, for example, but also on the surrounding areas, just a little bit, so it looks even more bruised. As for the gums, I'm going to go with a heavier mix, just because, well, they should be a bit more colorful. And I will also glaze around the eyes. I will apply as many layers as I need to. And with all the glazes of pink now applied, I'm going to do a final highlight all over them using Pallid Witch Flesh again. Just a very small highlight, just picking up maybe a dot here or there. With the skin now finished, it's time to move into the other details, and I'm going to start with the wood handle. And for this, my first highlight will be a mix of 2 parts Upgrade Hide and 1 part Fondia Brown. I will use this highlight mainly on the dark parts, and I will move this highlight down until it more or less starts doing anything. So right about there. And for the second highlight on the wood, I'm going to use Upgrade Hide. And for this highlight, I'm going to go a bit further down here. Also here in darker parts I'm going to make some more highlights. And for the final highlight on the wood I'm going to use a mix of 1 part oak broad hide and 1 part paddlewood flesh. Try to make the thinnest line possible here for this highlight. But again, also picking up some details here on darker parts. With the wood finish I'm going to move into his beard, and for this I'm going to start with grey sear. Just picking up the strands of hair, very simple thing to do here. And for the final highlight on the beard, I'm going to use Korax White. Also with Korax White I'm going to highlight the nails and the teeth. I'm avoiding to use something like pure white just because it just wouldn't feel good here. It's way too clean for this kind of guy. With that done, it's now time to paint the fur, and for this I'm going to start with Talan Sand. And I will use Talan Sand to highlight the darker bits of the fur, just picking up these strands here with a single line, or a double line if I feel fancy. As you move downwards the fur, for example here, there will be a point where the Talan Sand will be almost invisible. In my case, it was this bit here. So at that point I will stop highlighting with Talan Sand. And for the second highlight on the fur, I'm going to use a mix of Talan Sand and paddlewood flesh. This is 1 part paddlewood flesh, 1 part Talan Sand. And what I will do with this is on the darker bits, I'm going to do a smaller highlight, more focused towards the edges, basically picking up more of the pointy bits of the fur. And again, as before, you will highlight this and it will be a point where it kind of makes no sense to keep on highlighting. So about here, I'm just shifting the hue instead of highlighting, so I'm going to stop. And for the final highlight in the fur, I'm going to use pure paddlewood flesh. I will use this to highlight here, especially towards the bottom. And as I move upwards, I'm going to take less and less area until I'm basically just doing small dots here at the top, just on the very ends of each strand. And with that done, there is only one thing left to paint, and this is all the metallic details. And for this, I'm going to move into Iron Hand Steel. I'm going to base coat them all. Even if the armor and the weapon will be a different color, I'm going to use Iron Hand Steel as a base for both of them. With that base coat applied, I'm going to start shading it, and for this I'm going back to my trusty mix of 1 part wildwood and 4 part contrast medium, and what I will do is a couple of different things. For the parts that will be brass, I will just apply this as a reset shade basically, or to any parts that I want to be extra shaded. Alternatively, you can apply this all over and then clean up using Iron Hand Steel, but I prefer just to save myself that one step. For the small details like the keys and the buttons, I'm just going to apply this all over. It's just easier. And for the weapon, what I will do is apply a TMM pattern. I will apply dark towards the bottom here and towards the top on the flat surface. And I will do as many layers as I need on this. Always apply and feather it out. just like that. And again, I'm going to apply as many layers as I need to get the result that I want. While my second layer of the wildwood mix over the weapon dries, I'm going to apply the tinting color over the pre-shaded brass parts, and for this I'm going to use a mix of 1 part skeleton hide and 1 part plague bear flesh. I mixed that little bit of plague bear flesh because I want a slightly greener hue to this metal. This mix is so transparent that the pre-shading shines all through, providing a very nice contrast. With all the layers now applied, I'm going to take a mix of 1 part Gergrant Fir and 1 part Wildwood, and I will apply it on the back of the edge, so to speak, here on the top, just like that, and then I'm going to feather it out. And again, I will do this as many times as I need to get the results that I want. What I'm adding is just a little bit more hues onto the steel. You can also create this sort of stippling texture over that, so it looks like a bit more rusted. With all those shading applied and the blade looking properly rusted, I'm going to highlight the metallic details, and for this I'm going to take an optic alloy and start highlighting the shoulder pads and the other brass details. I have finished highlighting all the shoulder pads and all the brass details, but they look a bit too bright and I'm not really happy, so I'm going to take a mix of 2 parts Militarum Green and 1 part Wildwood. I'm going to thin it down into kind of a glaze, more or less. I'm going to feather it out so it doesn't really matter, I just want a thin consistency so it doesn't cover over everything. And I will apply this as a glaze towards the darker bits, just like this, over the midtones and over the shadows. I ended up applying several layers of that glaze because I really liked how it was looking, and as a final touch on the shoulder pads and on the brass details, I'm going to do a final highlight using Canoptic alloy again. And to finish off the whole model, this is just the blade and the keys left to paint. And for this I'm going to start highlighting them using again Iron Hand Steel, just a small edge highlight here. And I'm going to do the same on the blade, just a thin edge highlight. And you can do some scratches as well, same as we did with the cloth details, for example. Here on the blade you can also do some lines perpendicular to the edge of the blade. And for the final highlight I'm going to take Iron Breaker, and I'm just going to do a very small highlight on the blade, just basically picking up the most upward facing edges here. Also, don't forget to highlight the keys as well. And with that last step done and the base painted, our Kosargi Nightguard is finished, and if you want to see how I painted this base, you will have a link to the video in the top right corner. And what a joy these minis are to paint, so relaxing compared to other more demanding stuff, and such a great fun and a great canvas to experiment and come up with very interesting recipes. So guys, hope you enjoyed this one and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye! Do you like my videos and want to help me make them? Well, there are several ways you can do that. You can follow me on social media. You have the links to all my social media in the description below. You can also check all my affiliate links in the pinned comment of this video. Use those links in your next hobby purchase and help me without any additional cost to you. I also have a link for the brushes that I used on there, but most importantly, there is Patreon and channel members. You have the link to my Patreon in the description below in the pinned comment of the video, or if you prefer, you can just click the join button below this video. Patreon and channel members help me do all the cool projects that I want to make and help me improve the quality of my videos. Don't be afraid, no content will ever be hidden behind a paywall, but it's a nice way to help me. You will get something back for your generosity. As I said, guys, thank you very much for watching, and a special thank you to Heather Amster, Nicholas Fournier, Brian Betso, Gringar, LMAP Limited, Tyrannosaur, Carlos Rivera, Chris Goldenthal, Christoph Moret, Javi Mota, Kim Anderson, Michael Boye, Robert Smith, Thomas Ustergaard, Tom Brand, Victor Domen, Dark Avok, Arundel, Charles Almintas, Chris Broga, Chris Fivey, Kieran Omurthai, Chris Talios, Dan Mako, Darcy Farrar, Darby Sutherland, Dr. V, Gareth Smith, Geoffrey Dell, G-Force, Green Rollins, Jack Scouten, Jamie Milligan, Josh Simpson, JT Butler, Kevin Mian, Kevin Sulas, Leonard Lindemann, Liam Clancy, Mark Jarvis, Natius Maximus, Nick DeMao, Oscar Jonathan Tomber, Royal Nilsson, Samuel Sasa Park, and Dusted for being the coolest persons in the planet. Be like these fine folks on my Patreon and take control.